I should say the things have changed in some ways.
Who is the determinant of the public interest?
The more time people spend in digital worlds, the more of our lives we live there.
Intercoin, bringing power to the people. I'd like to introduce Scott Santens. I have known for several years, author of Let There Be Money, a book on Amazon that I would say explains UBI to many people. When I first met Andrew Yang back in 2019, he told me that Scott was essentially his guru. Those are his words. So I think, Scott, you're kind of patient zero for a lot of these things, UBI in the United States. Can you kind of talk a little bit about yourself, and how did you come to know Andrew, and how did you get everybody so inspired with UBI?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Greg. And yeah, we've known each other for years, also since before Andrew's campaign even started. And as for me, I got onto basic income back in 2013, and my origins were actually from a thread that hit the front page of Reddit, and it was all about how quickly automation is advancing and how society is not preparing for how quickly it's happening. And in that thread, a book was mentioned repeatedly. This book was called Mana by the author Marshall Brain. And I read that book, and it really just kind of made some things click as far as the future, as I was already hoping. Like, I'd always been a fan of Star Trek, and I wanted us to reach towards this Star Trek future. And reading that book really kind of connecting some dots as being like, well, yeah, we are in a situation where things can get a lot worse, or things can get a lot better. Essentially, the choice facing us is Star Trek versus the Hunger Games, and I opt for Star Trek. And the this mechanism of getting us to this better future, as believed by the author, was basic income. So I started looking into basic income more, and I learned a lot about the history and the evidence and the trials. And just the more I looked into it, the more I realized that this is actually a really important idea, not just for the future, which have actually been adopted decades ago. So I just started my advocacy through the route of blogging about it, writing about it, speaking about it, trying to simplify what was academic papers that were very dry and long, to getting more people to understand the evidence and arguments for basic income and history in a more readable, understandable way. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I met Andrew in I think it was around 2016 or late 2016, early 2017. And this was through the Economic Security Project, which, after it was founded, it tried to bring people together across the country who were interested in this. And that was where I met Andrew. And yeah, we've known each other ever since. And he was very excited to tell me, when he was first decided to run for president, and I was very excited to hear about that. And I was, right in his corner and helping to support him all the way, because I knew it was such a big moment and such opportunity to actually expand the awareness of basic income in the country. And he certainly accomplished that. So many more people know basic income now because of Andrew Yang, and hopefully that will continue. And I was actually, timing was great too, as far as that knowledge being out there with the, before the pandemic happened. I think that really helped us do what we needed to do then as well.
Yeah, that so much has happened in the last few years. I feel like UBI has gone from a niche only a few people talked about. I remember thinking about it, and also 2014, 2015, and and then Andrew Yang, his whole presidency that's his big issue. I was almost going to ask, did he decide to run after you kind of taught him about UBI, or he learned about UBI, or was he going to run anyway? Because he was doing Venture for America, and he saw all these things, of course, and tied it all together. But without UBI, do you think he would have even run, as a candidate?
No, UBI was the inspiration. It was, he firmly believed in the importance of UBI, and it's not like he discovered UBI through me. It was that, he came upon the idea through his own experience with Venture for America, as far as trying to create jobs in city after city in places that like New Orleans and Detroit, and in places that a lot of entrepreneurs weren't really like going to. So he learned that even if you create new jobs, that there was just like this giant hole in the economy, that all these jobs were just disappearing, and he saw that as automation being largely responsible for that. And so that was his origins of it. And he thought to himself, well, what do I do? I faced that same question, and my decision was to start like writing about it and speaking about it and stuff. And his decision was, well, what can I do to uplift this idea? What about running for president? I think that would make a huge difference. So yeah, it was very central to his run.
I remember I met Andrew, I think it was 2018 or 2019. My friends told me, here's this guy. He's going to be running for president on the UBI platform. I got really excited. The reason I liked UBI is because all the stuff that I build with qbix and Intercoin is sort of programmable, programmable social networks that people can install themselves, programmable money that communities can release themselves. And one of the things is, how do you get the money into the hands of your members? So in the crypto space, and we're going to talk a lot in this space about crypto and technologies. In the crypto space, a lot of this is called airdrops. And so the idea of getting a currency in the hands of many people is a very well-known thing in the crypto space, but perhaps not the idea of doing it continuously, day after day or month after month. It's sort of just done as a tool to bring awareness to a specific token or whatever. But I feel like a lot of the stuff in the crypto space is libertarians and others putting their money where their mouth is, like actually building something in the virtual world that could work. And what's interesting is, and sometimes we have people like Patrick Friedman, the grandson of Milton Friedman, who started the Seasteading Institute, and he's got investors like Peter Thiel and that and other things. You got all these people supporting these kind of out of the box ideas, economies that are maybe unconnected to the federal government. And at the same time, some people try to use the federal government, like Richard Nixon, others, and Andrew, to create these ideas from the top down. So I'm interested in this space because we're sort of building solutions from the bottom up. And there's also attempts to use the current machinery and the current governments to introduce them top down, like in South Africa and so on. So that's why I got interested in it. And I seem to be coming more from the bottom up approach. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about in this space. So what do you think in general? Like, you've seen all these different approaches to UBI. What do you see as like having promise in the next coming years? Let's talk about the top down first, and then, because we'll have plenty of time to talk about the bottom up.
Sure. So I would say that I'm interested in the how do we get to basic income as quickly as possible. I'm agnostic to the concept of how it's actually implemented. I don't believe that it has to be done by government, but I do think it's most likely to be done by government. And the question too is which steps can we take? So those steps can be via government, or those steps can be taken outside of government. And so that's why I support all sorts of different approaches, as far as like state by state, steps at the federal level, and also various Web3 based approaches now as well. And I've been excited to see those building out and expanding over the years as well, from what was like the first basic income cryptocurrency project, what is now multiple cryptocurrency projects, all around the world. I would say in the US, I was really hoping that the monthly child tax credit would stick around and help build that bridge as people, families at least, got used to a monthly check. And it was very unfortunate to see it lapse at the end of the year. So it only lasted 6 months. It was not able to be passed as we'd hoped this year so far. I still hope that it can pass and be restored. There was a lot of data from that I think is really important. A lot of stories out of that, they're really important. Like, it dropped child poverty by 1/3 when it was canceled. It increased child poverty by over 40%. And also as a result, when it was canceled, parental employment decreased. And so you could see that it actually was harmful to employment to remove that base of income underneath people, which helps people understand that having some stable income actually is able to connect people to the work that they want to pursue. It can help pay for childcare. It can help pay for travel and clothing and just everything you need to have that job. So stuff like that, I think, and also as a result, during the pandemic, obviously we saw the stimulus checks as well, which are important steps, and also we saw the launch of Mayors for Guaranteed Income, and now over 80 different cities are in the process of or have already started or ended citywide pilots looking at different demographics and stuff. And that's exciting too. I think that's important not only for the data, but also the stories that are coming out of that, since I think that that's really what influences people is a story they can connect to. So that's been really valuable. And I would also like to see various states follow Alaska's lead. Alaska's had a UBI since 1982, small and annual, but it's there. It's fully universal. It's unconditional. And Oregon will be getting signatures to put a $750 per year dividend for everyone in Oregon on the ballot 2024. And hopefully some other states will follow that approach as well. But yeah, I kind of just believe in a shotgun approach to just try as much as we can to build the movement forward.
Yeah, so now on this show, I like to dig into a lot of the controversial and the substance. I like to talk about why something not work or can we improve things and so on. So obviously we've tried UBI. Many people have been pushing for UBI for years. There have been, I think Richard Nixon, while he was president, almost got it done. And he had a bunch of support from economists, but he couldn't get it there. And I think a lot of the objections to UBI seem to come from the left and the right, but also there's a lot of support for UBI. So first, the support. Someone like Martin Luther King openly advocated for UBI. He discovered the idea of UBI as something that could help people get dignity, people be able to essentially, he felt like it would solve a lot of things with poverty, just like Bernie Sanders feels that universal health insurance can level the playing field and create a safety net for people. So definitely that is something that was on the left a long time ago. And also on the right, I mean, Richard Nixon was from the Republican Party, but also I think that someone like Andrew Yang could easily run in the Republican Party because they would talk about family values and how the kids, like you're talking about, the kids would be, the parents would have more time to spend with their kids. In fact, they could even take care of their own parents who used to take care of them. You could also talk about how Milton Friedman, if you go way back, Milton Friedman has something called the negative income tax, which was in the limit essentially the same as UBI, and we could talk about that. Milton Friedman was talking about how the government could pay you if you made below a certain level, and they would discover this using your tax returns. In the end, giving you sort of a floor, and if you taxed it back, you could make it look exactly like a UBI. But Milton Friedman was very much a libertarian, a consequentialist libertarian. That is to say, a libertarian who argues for a specific policy or approach on the basis of outcomes, not philosophy. So a deontological libertarian is someone who says the NAP, non-aggression principle, is the most important, even if the outcomes are worse. But someone like Milton was always, he's a Nobel Prize winning economist. He's, for example, responsible for our army being a volunteer army instead of being a mercenary army. Being a conscripted army. So basically, he was in favor of a UBI. And I feel like a lot of people are in favor, but here are the things that they say. On the left, they are distrustful of consumer choice and people doing what they want with their money. They're distrustful of school vouchers, for example, of school choice, because they say that schools, which have the best advertising, will simply get the best students. They also say that public schools will get starved of resources if people just exercise their consumer choice. On the right, they're distrustful of people's time, discretionary time. So they feel like, hey, if you're not in starvation mode, you might actually not work, or you might do things that are just, the economy will not go as quickly as it could if there's not all these desperate people who have to work. So, what do you say to kind of the people who've said, well, if you give people too much freedom with their money or too much freedom with their time, they're going to make the wrong choice, something like that?
Yeah. So let's say first of all, I just want to mention that a lot of people don't know that Friedman was actually directly asked about UBI before, and he said that UBI and negative income tax were two ways of doing the same thing. So he did approve of both, and he did see that both could accomplish theoretically identical outcomes depending on design. So yeah, he supported basic income, and I also like his. People can find they can look up like Milton Friedman negative income tax and watch the video where he talks about negative income tax and the arguments there. And he himself is asked about trusting people, about how people could get cash and then use it on things that society didn't approve of and whatnot. And his response to that was, well, do you believe that people don't have the ability to sell like food stamps for cash or sell other things for cash that if they want it, like of course they can do that. Nothing's stopping them from doing that. So really you're just reducing the amount that's provided to them, and then there's some middleman that captures some of that. And so why not just provide them the cash and let them do whatever, regardless of what it is? And I think from a libertarian approach too, like, isn't that the point of things? Like, as far as like maximum freedom, allowing people to make their own choices. Who are we to say that someone's choice is wrong? Regardless of what that choice is, we're always going to be disagreeing with each other's choices. I personally think that really the problem is about trust and this distrust that is just kind of endemic and kind of foundational to our system. Like it's built on just trust. We say, look, we don't trust you to work on your own. So what we're going to do is withhold access to food and housing and stuff unless you do what we want, unless you do what people with money want and property want, then you gain access to the food and housing that you need. And so, yeah, it's a very distrustful and full of force system. Like as far as the NAP goes, anyone who believes in the non-aggression principle should be against this thought of withholding what people need in order to get them to do what you want. Basic income instead is based on trust. It says, look, we trust you to pursue what's important to you with money. We don't think that we should threaten you with starvation or homelessness in order to work a job at some low wage. We believe that you will want to work, and that just having food, a house, a roof over your head is not enough. It's not enough for any of us, and that just as Milton Friedman believes in a fully volunteer army, that a fully voluntary labor market is actually the way to go. And nothing is voluntary if you don't have the ability to refuse it, to say no to it. And that's what basic income does to the labor market. It makes it more free. It enables people a lot more choice in what it is that they do. And so, yeah, I think for that reason, it's actually very important. It's really just a matter of trust and distrust.
I think so many people have this reaction that basic income is sort of socialism. You hear it, on Fox News. Certainly in this country, in the United States, there's a big distrust of socialism and communism. And I think that goes back also to the history of the United States with the McCarthy era, which originally, was against Nazis and National Socialists, but then became against all kinds of this, and people lost their jobs. And the original deplatforming, you could say, was of leftists probably for a few decades. COINTELPRO was another thing. And of course, people felt that was for national security. They felt that even labor movements at some point, I think, could be considered dangerous because they were anathema to the rugged capitalism and the entrepreneurial spirit of America. But at the same time, what I see, at least, in 21st century, is that many of these things help the entrepreneurial spirit. Many safety nets help people to take risks. So, for example, if you have bankruptcy protection, right? In the worst case, the individual who used to go to debtor's prison and had to, maybe sell themselves into indentured servitude to pay off a debt, now has the option of declaring bankruptcy and walking away. And this is a protection that has helped people to take risks in their life. Another one is limited liability companies, corporations that are insulated from personal debt if they're, not commingling their funds with the personal. People can start companies, and I think that's actually why the United States has more entrepreneurs here than Europe and other places, where people have unlimited sort of responsibility in some cases to others if they take on a risk, like starting a company, and so I'm not here to necessarily argue which employee protections are better or this and that, but I think safety nets seem to be helpful to a lot of free association and working on open source projects, working on science, things that the market wouldn't immediately reward. And so these things are complementary to what the traditionally would have to happen, which is you have a rich uncle or you have a VC or you went to Harvard and you know people and they can invest in your business. That's great. But if you don't have that, imagine how many entrepreneurs could come from, for example, the Midwest or a lot of these Rust Belt towns, which we're going to talk about, capital leaving these towns. But of course, if everyone had a sort of a safety net where they didn't have to worry anymore about the day-to-day things, it would happen. Last thing I just want to ask you is also the capitalists, in fact, the venture capitalists, seem to see the new technology coming down the pipe. You see artificial intelligence that Elon Musk warns about all the time. You see computers making people more efficient. Our efficiency has gone up I think it's 4 times, but you can correct me, since 1950. So what happened is that in the past, people were less efficient and only one person out of the family worked, the breadwinner. And so, one person could use one paycheck to pay for the whole thing. Now, not only are people more efficient, you need less people. Everyone works in the family. And so essentially what's happening is that that also helps the wages to get depressed. And so essentially everyone's in a race to the bottom for human labor. And I think these capitalists, I just want to name them, like not just Elon Musk. You got Sam Altman from Y Combinator. He started for a brief moment the America Fund, the dividend. You got Andrew Yang. You've got the Mayors for Guaranteed Income. You've got tons of billionaires who all support universal basic income, and they're all capitalists. So clearly, they see that there's a need for it. So does UBI actually help capitalism, or is it mostly socialist? What would you say?
Yeah, no, that was a lot of good stuff. Try to remember all these threads. I would start with that. Socialism is focused on the means of production, and communism is focused on equal outcomes. And basic income is actually focused on the means of consumption and equal opportunity. So it is not socialism or communism. Just like when people say that, I would like to point to Alaska and just be like, well, is Alaska like our socialist or communist state in the U.S.? Because it certainly votes Republican mostly and is representative of Republicans, so it doesn't really make any sense. Basic income is actually fuel for markets. It's cash, and if you are able to, if more people have cash, then they're able to express that demand in markets. And I would argue that markets function better if every person in an economy actually has the money to spend into the economy. Because if there are people without money, then the market doesn't see the demand. Markets can confuse or conflate lack of spending with people not actually wanting something instead of people not being able to afford something and can't tell the difference. So I think it's important to capitalist markets that consumers have at least some amount of money to signal demand for those markets to meet. That's how to make a better functioning economy. And as you said, entrepreneurship is very impacted by basic income, and I would argue it's along 2 main routes, and one of those is definitely risk aversion, as you mentioned, where we are inherently adverse to risk, and it just makes sense that especially if you have a family, and let's say you have an idea for a new business, what happens if that business fails? If that business fails, it could mean that your family is out on the streets. Maybe you'll even fall right through the safety nets, and harm could come to your family. So it could be a scary thing to start a business. Basic income, because it's unconditional, and that every member of that family is covered, then someone with an idea in that family can feel a lot better about taking that risk and saying, let's let's do it. If I fail, my family's going to be okay. And so you're going to see a lot more entrepreneurs as a result of just that reduced risk. And of course, also there's the venture capital side of it too, where it can actually function as venture capital. You get a bunch of people together, an idea between as far as a new business, and you can pool those resources, and you can actually bootstrap a business off the ground just on your own, instead of like requiring some kind of venture capital seed funding in order to make that idea happen. So we're going to have a lot more new startups as a result of basic income as well. And then there's the customer side of it. And so I think a good example of this is a story from Namibia. And so Namibia did a basic income pilot where everyone received for over a year a basic income universally across this large village. And one of the recipients with the first payout went out and bought a bunch of flour and yeast and started like a bread making business. And you can imagine if she would have gotten a loan and she could have done the exact same thing, but would she have been successful? She would have been selling bread to a village full of people without the money to buy the bread. But thanks to the basic income going to everyone in the village, then everyone had the money to buy the bread, and that business actually became very popular. And she has she was like the most successful recipient of basic income thanks to starting that business. And so it's important too to see that basic income is not just about risk aversion reducing and capital for starting up businesses, but it's also about fueling the customers to actually be patrons of those businesses. And that's how you actually create a successful entrepreneurial economy. And I think that will reverse what we've been seeing as far as fewer and fewer people starting businesses. And I think even there's some evidence too, even the child tax credit actually helped to increase parental entrepreneurship as well. So you can see a little bit of that just recently in the data in the US.
I think that's awesome. This is the first part of the conversation. We've talked about support from the political right, political left, the capitalists, the socialists, open source advocates, and so on. I want to take a break, and as I see some people had questions, I want to bring them up. Also, there's two other parts I want to discuss. We're going to get into the second part very soon. It's going to be about objections. It's going to be about problems. Just to give you a taste. We want to ask who will do the dirty jobs then, if everyone is cushy and happy. How can we make sure that people have only one account in this UBI system? Because obviously there's incentive to create multiple accounts, and so on. Before we get into that, though, I'd love to get some people that had their hands up. You got Forward Party Fan. Yes, you got Mimetic Money. Let's have you two ask questions, and then the rest of you hold your questions. We're going to continue with the second half. So Forward, please go ahead.
Well, I've noticed a real problem with foster kids getting out and going right in the prison system. How do you think a universal basic income could help end that?
What was that as far as who going into the prison system?
The foster kids aging out of the foster system.
Oh, yeah. So two things, I guess, to talk about that. First of all, I think it's important that we recognize that so much of the crime we see around us is due to both lack of income via poverty and also the effects of high inequality on social cohesion, and also the impacts of stress from unstable income. Like a lot of crime comes out of those things that are directly a result of not having a basic income. And we've seen too from experiments that crime definitely reduces. In the Namibia pilot, crime dropped by over 42%, and we actually see in the Canadian pilot, actually happened in the 70s, crime dropped by 15%, and it can even drop each time temporarily after the dividends go out in Alaska, because it's just once a year, so that makes sense as well. And so, yeah, there are definite impacts on crime, and therefore definite savings from reduced crime as a result of adopting a basic income. And when it comes to, like, it's ridiculous how high the rates are recidivism, where people exit prison and then go back into it. And part of it, of course, is this how we treat people who exit prison, as far as, they can essentially be locked out of the economy. They can try for a job and they check the box that says that they were in prison and they don't get the job. So when that happens, that you don't have any choice, because again, we withhold food and housing, resources you need to survive, unless you do what people want. But at the same time, when it comes to people who exit prison, we also say, no, you don't get the job. So they just have to resort to crime. And that's one of the reasons why recidivism rates are so ridiculously high. And basic income would definitely reduce that. And yeah, I'm really excited about the spread of the pilots for testing this on youth exiting the foster system, where it started in Santa Clara County in California, and with some youth there, and it expanded to be statewide. And some of the other cities have pursued that approach too. And this approach has even just started up in Wales. Wales will also be testing this. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to show just how positive of impact that basic income has, especially on that group that traditionally has much worse outcomes exiting the foster care system. And I expect that besides reduced crime, we'll see a lot other positive things as well, as far as increased entrepreneurship and increased incomes overall, better employment, and I think that hopefully even we could start something at a federal level after seeing that, and that could actually be a step toward basic income nationally as well through that group.
I would also like to add that in Alaska, we've pinned several tweets to the top, and you can see in Alaska, the UBI does not increase unemployment. But what's interesting also is that Alaska was consistently in the top 2 states, with Utah, tied with Utah usually, for lowest inequality. So the Gini index, which measures inequality, was essentially showing the lowest inequality of all 50 states. Now, I don't know why, but starting in 2019, Alaska fell to 5th place. But all throughout this time that it had this UBI, it seemed to be consistently there. And remember, Alaska is full of people who, first of all, don't get a lot of sun. There's normally depression associated with seasonal affective disorder. They also have native peoples like the Inuit and the Aleut and others that essentially had sometimes trouble coping with what's going on. What's going on with the U.S. and also Canada and other places taking over their land. But at the same time, with all of that, the inequality is the lowest in Alaska. So something must be going right.
Yeah, I would also add too, just to touch a little bit more on the details of employment in Alaska, because it's really interesting. Like you said, there's no negative impact on employment, but to zoom in a bit on that, what researchers found looking at that was that there was a slight reduction in full-time employment in Alaska for certain people, but then also because of the additional spending into the economy, you saw these multiplier effects of helping business, and more people spending means more jobs created. And then people who were outside the labor market were able to join the labor market with those new jobs that were created from the additional spending. And then that ended up in a neutral state where the total employment was unchanged as far as full-time employment. But actually, there was increased part-time employment. Part-time employment increased by 17% in Alaska thanks to the dividend. So I think that's interesting to see that more part-time jobs are created, more people are able to take those jobs, and it maybe made more sense for those people to take those jobs too. Because again, basic income doesn't hurt people for taking those jobs. You don't lose it when you take a part-time job, unlike welfare, where you do lose that income if you take a part-time job. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at just everything there is to learn from Alaska.
Also, mimetic money, you had a question, or did you want to come up and ask Scott anything?
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Great space. Quick question with a little bit of a setup, some context. There's lots of basic income programs we've tried, welfare, unemployment. When you cross into the universal basic income, I wanted to get Scott's thoughts on how you are not going to have rampant inflation when you try to finance that.
Yeah, first of all, just clarify that we don't have basic income programs. It's not fair to call welfare programs basic income programs, and that universal basic income is different. Basic income is actually universal and unconditional. Those are two parts of the definition. So, I call it unconditional basic income. Other people call it universal basic income. Other people call it basic income. But it's all the same thing. It's all universal and unconditional, whereas welfare and traditional unemployment benefits are not. But with that said, I think that when it comes to inflation, we're in a tough position even right now where things are so politicized, and people are talking about inflation from a political angle where it's in the best interest for people to believe certain things. In this case, it's good for Republicans to make everyone think that it was Democratic spending, where Trump's stimulus checks were great, but then Biden's stimulus check was bad and causes inflation. And it's very politicized, and it's very demand oriented, where there's this belief that inflation we're seeing is because demand was raised far above supply, and that because of that prices had to increase. Whereas I think it's important that people understand that what really caused this inflation that we're seeing right now around the world is a pandemic that impacted people around the world, and the pandemic's impact on supply chains also as a result of various countries' reactions to the pandemic, as far as shutdowns, and China's zero COVID policy means that they've been shutting down factories, which means that less stuff has been produced, and snarled supply lines means that stuff took a lot longer to get to places. Then part of this too is that the oil companies shut down the fields in the heart of the pandemic and shutdowns, when demand for fuel went so low that it actually went negative. And as a result, when things started back up again, they didn't just flip on a switch and suddenly all the oil was back up to 100% capacity. Instead, they started far below that and have been slowly going back up. Then all of a sudden, Putin invades Russia. Putin invades Ukraine, and then suddenly, there's the reactions to that around the world as taking essentially Russian oil off the market. So huge supply decrease. So in general, what we're seeing right now is because of supply shocks, and also this a shift towards goods away from services, during the heat of the pandemic. And so this big picture look at inflation is what people need to look at, regardless of their partisan team that they believe themselves to be on. And it's important to recognize that what is the best way to handle inflation? Is it to make sure that people have less money to spend? Is that the best way? Is it if we raise interest rates, then there's going to be fewer investments made, which means less capacity. And I'd also argue that part of the reason too is actually decades of that, where very low inflation and stagnant wages meant that we weren't making investments in capacity because people weren't signaling enough demand in order to get businesses to invest in more capacity. And so part of the issue is just this underutilized capacity in the long term, and we want more capacity in the future. And so I personally think that we should be looking at this much more from a supply angle than a demand angle, and that we want to make sure that we increase more supply. So when we talk about how to implement UBI without doing inflation, without seeing inflation, then part of it is to make sure that we actually have enough to meet the demands of what people are spending on. And so therefore we should invest in those. We should care about increasing productivity. We should care about draining the useless work out of the economy, the bullshit jobs out of the economy. We should focus on that. And also the taxation that we use to drain demand from the economy should actually be sufficient and intelligently done. So I'd argue too that along with UBI comes with taxation that makes sense. So I personally think that stuff like land value taxes, consumption taxes, tiny transaction taxes, carbon taxes, these things make far more sense to me than income taxes. And all of that is a balance to figure out the inflation level that we want, and the amount of basic income that we want. That's part of it. And also what programs we want to be running alongside basic income as well, because we can reduce a lot of spending on welfare, we can reduce a lot of spending on existing tax expenditures and subsidies as part of basic income, and all of that together is how to go about management of inflation.
Yeah, if I could just chime in, I wanted to add something before I lost my train of thought, but it had to do with inflation and workers and demand and supply. Right, everything goes up. Absolutely everything goes up. Whether there's inflation, everything skyrockets in price. Right, everyone, like owners, entrepreneurs, they make the same income, if not a little more. They get taxed the exact same. Yet wages are stagnant and they're barely enough to get by on a weekly basis. Yet you have places now hiring everywhere, everywhere. Everyone's desperate for workers. No one wants to pay the workers. Gregory was saying, who's going to do the shitty jobs? Pay the people for the shitty jobs and they'll work it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just companies are greedy. They want to keep you in 1990s pay when it's like they act as if they don't see what the real world is going through. People want to buy things, right? America runs on consumerism. We're a capitalist country. You don't pay us enough to consume anything, so you pay us enough to live minimalist, like a minimalist lifestyle. The middle class is virtually no more. And it's pretty simple. You tax the shit out of all these corporations once they reach a certain cap for the year, and they can they can allocate those funds to wages. Like, you go to McDonald's, right? These guys, these people put up with a lot. Rude customers, somebody messed up their supply for the week or whatever. Like, they're scrambling around. You put people on salaries, they work 80 hours a week, but the money they're taking home never makes any sense. Yet the heads of these places are on yachts, living on vacations. They shake hands and make $1 million. Like, that's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. Like, people will work, people will consume. It's not that hard to instead of making a program and now printing new money and furthering inflation, you just tax. You swipe the pen. They make a bill. These companies, once they reach certain market caps, once they reach certain market caps for the year, whatever, quarterly, their profits, instead of giving it to the board that virtually does nothing but paper push, they're not putting in real work like that, like the employees are. And the employees always seem to get screwed over, which is why now, after the pandemic, everybody was like, dude, fuck going to work. They don't pay me enough. They want to pay me chump change, but want me to do 4 people's jobs. Like, you know what I mean? That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
Why you have the issue of where we're at today. And it's like, if they just stopped being so cheap, forcefully stopped them, from being able to be so cheap, and all these little loopholes, we would be fine.
See,
Can I just interject, because I had my hand
sure.
up, the second person to have a hand up, but I didn't get a chance.
This is
an amazing idea to have universal basic income, right? But as far as when the stimulus checks started rolling in, I saw that system fail because a lot of people didn't want to work because they were making more money with the stimulus payments. So that was one point. Thing, when you speak about universal, is it United States or is it global? When we talk about Star Trek and all that, they are thinking on a global level of equality of what you do, right? You get rewarded by what you do. I think if we have a stimulus, if you have a universal basic income, we're going to have a lot of people that won't want to put their best foot forward, right? We won't have the system of working hard. What's happening is right now we're losing the fact that we're not having a good policing system for our current governments that are doing what they're doing again and again and again. Corporations, again and again. We don't have the policing. The police that we have are in their pockets. So what the system is not working. So I'm just trying to wonder, Scott, and this is for you, how is your system in applying a universal basic income going to get rid of the corruption that already exists in our system? And can this be applied to third world countries where the corruption is far rampant than United States? And
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, a couple things here. First, I think it's really important to get at this this belief that was spread as far as people not wanting to work and what like the data actually shows. And the question really is not that people don't want to work. It's more that people don't want to work at the price being offered, in which case the price should raise in order to get those people into work. And that's actually what happened. Like we did see workers gain more bargaining power, and wages actually went up faster than inflation. For the that was a great thing to see. And when we unemployment is actually at a 50-year low right now. Like economists actually didn't really think it was possible anymore to go below 5% unemployment, but now we're at around 3.5% unemployment. And so it's hard to say that people don't want to work, that didn't want to work when the unemployment level is so historically low. And when you saw that the wages, the jobs that did raise their wages actually saw people and were able to fill those jobs. Like I think a good example is trucking, where part of the supply chain story, part of that problem was a decline of people wanting to take those jobs over the years, even the pandemic, and then that being something that was especially challenging during the pandemic. And now trucking is actually, as it was prior to, they've actually found those jobs that they needed to fill. And they did it by raising wages by 10%. And just paying truckers more, those jobs are filled. And you see that over and over again. And also, it's interesting how you're just looking at, there was kind of a natural experiment that happened during the pandemic as far as the unemployment checks went and the boost that happened there. And like half the states basically canceled it early, and half the states kept it longer. And multiple papers looked at this, multiple studies looked at it, and some found no impact, some found a slight impact, but it was really not a large thing. And that's even with unemployment. So that's not a stimulus check. That was actually paying people only if they were unemployed, and even that didn't really have any impact at all on people wanting to find jobs. So yeah, it really is about the rate of pay, the incentive being offered by employers, and if they offer enough, then they have no problem filling those jobs. And again, when you look at the data over and over again, even meta-analyses of the data, that basic income does not negatively impact employment, and that overall you can even see increases thanks to the additional spending. So that's definitely part of the picture that's important. As far as like how I see universal and definition of that, I obviously it's kind of is it universal? If it's not, I'm like on Mars and stuff, and do we need to go out like everywhere? Sure, you can be like, okay, universal means everything possible, but universal really is about the community adopting it. So it's universal in Alaskans. It would be universal in the country if we did it nationally, and it's possible too to do it universal across the world. I think it's more likely for that to happen via blockchain, via anything else. Like I don't see the UN doing like a basic income, but I do think that when we look at universality in the U.S., it's more likely to be citizens only, just like voting is citizens only. I think those can kind of tie to each other, where if you can vote, you get a basic income. If you can't, then you don't. That's the way I see it as far as universality in the U.S. And as far as like corruption and stuff goes, there's definitely an argument to be made that it would reduce corruption because, or not corruption even, but the fraud. And so if you have a non-universal program or have conditions, people are going to apply for that. If they don't have it, they'll try to take it. They'll try to take as much as they can. If they're especially if they need the money, that again, like it was related to crime. If you make sure that something is universal, then there is no need to try to lie your way into it. You already have it, and so that could displace other programs as well, especially if you replace those. And again, if people have less need to try to break the rules in order to get something because they already have something, you reduce crime, and part of that is reduction of fraud, part of that is fewer people lying to each other, trying to weasel money out of them, trying to trick them into money, into spending the money. It'll really impact even all these different ways of going about business that, say like multi-level marketing schemes and stuff. I think that could be negatively impacted by basic income. We'd see less of those. There's just a lot of fraud, I think, that could be reduced by basic income. And I think that other countries would also see a lot of reduced fraud and corruption by implementing it.
Oh, but I have to say, I love these questions. 8 of 5 questions.
Thank you for answering all those things. You were on point with a lot of things. As far as being implemented with, do you think it's a possibility in our society that something like this will, because it's a system based on trust, right? There's a lot of people that you come across that you cannot trust. And when you cannot trust, the system will fail. So if we have to trust people to do what they promise, then we need to, that's universal, right? Trust has to be universal for us to first implement this and place this into the system for it to actually work. We do not have trust in our governments. We do not have trust in the corporations, because right now we've been living in a world that the poor people are getting poorer, the middle class has disappeared, and right now the wealthy just get wealthier. So given the current situation, how do you think it will be possible for us to implement a universal basic income?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good understanding of the catch-22 that we face as well, as far as basic income essentially being an implementation of trust, but that even increases trust, but then there's a lack of trust in order to implement it. And I want to mention too, because this is actually one of the reasons why I think it's so important, is actually for the increasing of trust. Finland looked at trust levels in their experiment and found that basic income increased trust in politicians, the judiciary, and each other. And I think that's a really important impact to actually see that increased trust. And other experiments also showed increased social cohesion. One of the interesting stories from one of the pilots, I think it was the India pilot, I thought was fascinating, where someone said they were more willing to speak to people just out and about and engage in conversations with others because they felt that it was less likely to be a conversation where they would be asked for money. So this knowing that people might hit you up for money is also, I think, detrimental to social cohesion and trust. And so, yeah, the question as far as how do we get this going, part of it also, as you said, is lack of trust in existing trust in government. I was just reading a paper the other day about this too, where they were they found that people were more likely to support reductions of inequality, the increased redistribution policies, if they felt that they believed that government worked. If there was a faith in government, then they were more likely to support that. And if there wasn't, then they didn't. And I think that's also part of the reason why we're seeing, more people doing workarounds around government and saying, well, I don't trust the government. Let's, use Web3 instead. Let's just do it ourselves because they're not doing it. And so part of making sure that this happens is also, why Andrew Yang has pivoted towards, democracy reforms, that it's important to make sure government works, that government actually responds to people, that we have a government that actually functions. So, let's pass policies like nonpartisan primaries, ranked choice voting. Let's actually fix democracy itself so that it's more responsive, and then it's more likely to result in Congress that's willing to work together, willing to listen to people and the needs of the people, and focus on the basic needs of the citizens and therefore more likely to adopt basic income. Yeah, democracy is definitely part of making sure this happens, and so therefore I also support programs that are looking to reform and improve democracy as part of this. And I think that as far as maybe a step forward where we can do this, maybe it's something as boring as just doing a universal, standard tax credit instead of standard deduction, because a standard deduction is essentially a universal thing where everyone can claim the standard deduction if they want. And so, why not do a monthly or a standard credit instead of a standard deduction? And let's also add the option, just like the child tax credit, to receive that monthly instead of yearly. And I think maybe something that boring, something smaller, where you're just implementing something universally that could be the start of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for answering everything. Just good transparency. I gave you a follow. I have to bounce. I have to leave. So I appreciate everything that you do, and keep going after your dream. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Yeah. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah. No, I think these
Yeah.
questions are great. And actually, they take us into that second half, which is I wanted to challenge a lot of what the UBI advocates are saying. The third part is about the mechanisms, the banking system versus what you could do with crypto and so on. But I think these were very good questions. 805 raised. And Ariel and Izzy, I know that you have your hands up. I want to sort of
Yeah.
go through a second series of questions with Scott, and then you can jump in because we have so many people here who are interested in UBI, Forward Party, but as well as reform and democracy. So something you mentioned, Scott, by the way, I didn't even think about it when I was planning the space, but democracy dollars are a form of UBI where the votes are distributed to everyone equally. And, voting, everyone kind of feels right away that it should be one person, one vote. And so voting is sort of something that even well, not all, but a lot of Republicans who may not like socialism, but they like the idea of everyone having a vote, as long as maybe they're not a criminal or something like this. So the idea is, again, look at the voting. If you give everyone democracy dollars, it drowns out the something like $20 billion that's spent to amplify some voices over others. And in a way, it helps to dilute what was private interests influencing our democracy. And if you can see that, then maybe you can also see how giving everyone equal amounts of money can drown out the, say, central planners of the government or the industrialists who direct this or that economic. So it's power by the people, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I don't want to sound controversial or like I'm not against anything, like anyone in particular. I just like to do some critical thinking, right? And it's just like, all right, in America, we sent over X amount of billions of dollars to do transgender studies in Pakistan. It's just like, why don't you reallocate that back into the American people's pockets, the people that are going to keep the economy going and growing, and right, and then you'll have new entrepreneurs coming about. But like I don't know a single transgender in Pakistan, so why am I tax dollars going to study them? Like, shouldn't their own government allocate money to study their own people in their own countries? That's just like a critical thought of mine, right? And I'm like, gee, there would be a lot more money going around like worldwide if like, not for nothing, but if Americans were getting most of their taxes back instead of like to these like seemingly useless programs to Americans, like the one I just mentioned, right? And that's not to say that I'm against like any of that or whatever. Like, right, everybody can live how they want and whatever, to each their own. I'm just saying from a financial standpoint, like that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's like these types of programs and things like that, like not UBI, I think that's a great idea. But like the like things that they do with tax dollars that Americans work hard for. Sure, other people in other parts of the world need help and solutions with things, but it's like
Right.
not
Well,
citizens.
the funny thing is, right, is what you're criticizing is decisions made by people in charge of a lot of capital, which was collected through taxes or maybe collected through commerce, and then these people make a decision. With UBI, everyone makes their own decision on how to spend their little part of the economy. But here we're arguing about what can be done. The central planners do this, they do that. Some people are unhappy this way, some people are unhappy that way. So I think that actually is kind of leads me to what I wanted to pose to you, Scott. Okay, there are other ways that our society has found out to help people who need help, the indigent, the people who may be disabled. And so I want to go through them and you kind of give your idea about why can't we just use that? Okay, so for example, a lot of the people who are on the left and sometimes democratic socialists say the kind of thing that we just heard. They say, well, why don't we just use the money back home? We don't need the wars. We don't need everything. And on that, many people can agree. But then they say, well, why don't we have a federal jobs guarantee, for example? Why don't we just simply make sure people will work and simply guarantee them these jobs because we need a Green New Deal. We need the central plan to essentially plan our way to a greener future or this and that. And we need to put money in specific places rather than give it to the people and then have the people figure out where to put it. So,
I need to go to work like in like 20 minutes. I just want to say
please,
this
yes, go ahead.
really quick and just get it off my mind. It's that the one thing that's bothering me is how the waters are being muddied with a universal basic income. The thing is that most of welfare and unemployment benefits pays you to do nothing. Universal basic income pays you to do anything. So with a lot of blind partisans, I see this muddying of the waters of like, we already gave out money, but let's say a trucker was on unemployment and somehow that trucker made more money on unemployment than they did actually trucking. They wouldn't, if they went back to trucking, they would lose that money. Now, if they had a universal basic income, they would say, hey, this money stacks, so why don't I get this money and that money too, instead of being like, so stuck to something, instead of having my options limited. So every time I see this muddying of the waters of a UBI and general welfare and unemployment, they don't know what they're talking about because UBI stacks and all these other things do not stack. That's why you have no production and people not working, because the other things do not stack. Thank you.
And so, Scott, I would say there are two things here. One is the federal jobs guarantee. And I'm going to go through other ones like the earned income tax credit. I'm going to talk about other programs. But why not the federal jobs guarantee? And Ariel made a good point. There's no disincentive, obviously, to lose your welfare and means-tested benefits. But suppose that we only gave welfare to people who were truly disabled and that we get disability benefits. Everyone else had only a federal jobs guarantee. In order to get money, you would have to go and get a make-work job or something because at least you're being a productive member of society versus UBI. Like, why not just do what Bernie Sanders says? Because he's very skeptical of UBI. He prefers that people have jobs in order to get their wages. What would you say to that?
Yeah, there's a lot that I can say about a federal jobs guarantee, but to try to keep this shorter, first of all, I'd say that it's not that I'm against the idea ever existing. It's that I think that if the issue, which it is a lack of income, then we need to make sure that we build that floor first. I think it's from a moral perspective, I think it's wrong to continue withholding money from people on the condition they do stuff and then saying, hey, you can work for us, for the government, doing things that we want if you want this money to survive. And if you still refuse, then you get nothing. And I think that's just the bad thing. It's wrong to do. From an economic perspective, I also think it's the outcomes are worse. Where sure, a federal jobs guarantee would say reduce poverty, and that's good. That you would get more income to people, but the question is, what are they doing to get it? And also, what about all the other jobs too that people are just working for paychecks? I like David Graeber's argument, and I also recommend people read the book Bullshit Jobs to learn more about this concept of all this unnecessary work that's being done simply for a paycheck or other reasons. That there's just a lot of stuff we're doing that need not be done. And he saw basic income as being pivotal to actually eliminating much of that work, and hopefully all of it, with a sufficiently high basic income. Whereas a jobs guarantee would not really dent that at all. People would continue working jobs, especially if they paid more, however unnecessary the work is, if they had that. And also, I think that I like Milton Friedman's argument here too, as far as like the story of him like going to a work site and seeing all these workers here, and it was remember the comment was like, well, look at all these jobs that we've created, and he's I thought this was about like a tunnel.
You guys were digging with shovels, and they had backhoes, like they had machinery. Yeah.
Right, right. If you want jobs, then just give them spoons instead of shovels. That's how to really create jobs. So I think that there's a problem with efficiency and productivity by going the jobs route. We don't want to just create jobs, excuses for people, and we don't want that to be what we celebrate. We want stuff to get done, and so it'd be much better to we want more automation. If a job can be done by a machine, it should be done by a machine. So again, this goes to the value of labor, where the problem is the price of human labor too cheap. So, a basic income would help with that. Even like a minimum wage can help with that too. Like, let's try to reduce as much as possible the amount of work that need not be done. Let's reduce as much as possible the amount of work that humans are doing that machines can do. And then once the labor market is fully voluntary and people are choosing the jobs with full consent, then that's when you could offer jobs, from the government for people to do as far as jobs, like work that's not being done. And even then, the focus should be on like the tasks themselves. Like, we want to build this bridge, we want to build this infrastructure, and not we want to create, a million jobs. Like, it's really important to keep that focus on the actual production and utilization of resources for actually doing stuff.
Yeah, and there's a huge opportunity cost to jobs too. I just want to say, people could be spending time raising their kids. People could be spending time taking care of their parents who are getting older. And as someone who is, working on open source software for the last 10 years, I'm going to add a different perspective that I thought could be interesting too. There's a lot of nonprofit projects out there that have only begun to be monetized with cryptocurrency, like Ethereum and IPFS with Filecoin. But for the longest time, they weren't being monetized at all. People were just creating Linux, creating IPFS, creating all of these tools that we use every day, Wikipedia, for absolutely no monetary gain whatever. And they were only able to do that because they had some free time and they didn't have to spend every waking hour trying to survive and outrun the hunger bear. So basically, we have all these things. Science, people were working, universities had a stipend. These were the professors that were either independently wealthy, or poets like Lord Byron, or Newton was independently wealthy. You had all these people that were able to do things because they either had a stipend or they had some sort of safety net that the university gave them. So a lot of these things that don't actually get money, they don't fetch any profit for the people doing them, but nevertheless, you can have a model where millions of people contribute small things like Wikipedia, like open source projects, Linux, and so on, and science. And it's a very different culture where people compete to give things away everyone else does and publish their paper for free just so that they can attach their name to it. And sometimes it's really just to create a bug-free Linux or something else. And I think these projects, like Wikipedia, like Linux, have almost outstripped their competitors, have been financed with profits. Like Microsoft has Internet Information Server, but for the longest time now, the internet uses Apache and Nginx, open source. Britannica was a very well-known encyclopedia, Encarta by Microsoft, but now they're rounding errors compared to Wikipedia. So by unleashing the sort of collaborative power to produce things collectively, without the profit motive, but rather something else driving us, like Dan Pink's Drive, What Motivates Us, very good talk as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is another thing. It's like if we tell people what jobs to do, they will not be doing any of those things. They won't even be their own children. They'll be working 10-hour days at the law firm trying to make partner,
Yeah, I really like this argument from a psychological perspective of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, where, yeah, when people are intrinsically motivated to do something, they're self-driven, they want to do something because they want to do something, they want to accomplish something, they have a specific goal, there's the pleasure of it, there's, helping people, like, it's not about money. And when people do things because of intrinsic motivation, that actually tends to be, more productive. It can be, it's more creative. We want more intrinsic motivation. We want people to voluntarily choose to do things because they care about it. It's bad for productivity when people are doing something that they don't care about at all and may even hate and may even think is harmful, and they feel bad that they're doing it only for the money. And so, yeah, we want to create a situation where people are more able to do whatever they want, including any form of unpaid work, simply because they think that that's important. And we should not somehow, reduce the amount of that by forcing people into more paid jobs that they may not necessarily have any interest in doing.
So we're going to talk in the most interesting part, the third part, about systems and what it leads to. I'm just going to say one last thing about this, but then I want to get back to kind of challenging UBI, bashing it a little bit, and seeing, if all these other systems might be better. I'm going to say that Wikipedia, science, and all these other gift economies, like Creative Commons, art, and so on, they seem to have a completely different work product output. It's not, there's no copyright police going after you. You can freely use it and repurpose it however you want. And it's been freely accessible even to people in other countries which were restricted. Like, they can read Wikipedia, they can learn about things. So generally, these things seem to be a public good. And it's a sort of an industry that creates public good. I mean, even raising your own children to be, well educated and so on could be considered a public good. So these are the types of things that the market doesn't remunerate. And I would even say that by having a UBI, human activity is almost like naturally diverted to contributing to public good, as opposed to serving some employer just for the money,
Yeah, I agree. I have an article about the zombification of intellectual property where I get into how basic income could actually help break this just ridiculous amount of length of patents and copyrights and stuff, where it goes beyond lifetimes, and it's really mostly benefiting companies like Disney, as far as they just want to keep like Mickey Mouse out of the public domain and stuff. And even though we all know what Mickey Mouse is, it's basically in the public domain, but it's a legalized monopoly that they're able to continue doing. And a lot of this is they've been able to get these laws passed to extend it and extend it and extend it, because if you're an author, if you've created something, then you're like, well, I'm worried about my lifetime earnings. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have earnings throughout life in the future, so I support this lifetime patent or copyright kind of thing for myself because of my own economic insecurity. And so I think that if we want to get away from that and encourage more public domain and encourage more Creative Commons, that people need to feel that economic security through basic income, and that would be yet another kind of impact as far as possibly enabling us to rein back in the absurd lengths of these copyrights and patents. And because we see that so much good happens from stuff being in the public domain, so much good happens from stuff being in the Creative Commons, and so I think that would help. And I would even argue too that an interesting tax would be like a kind of a carbon tax approach to intellectual property, where let's say you say, Disney, if you want to maintain your copyright on the mouse, then you're free to do that, but it's going to the fee is going to double every year in order to keep that. So eventually it becomes so expensive in a tax to maintain that monopoly provided by the government that Disney says, all right, go ahead, Mickey Mouse can go into the public domain now, and we're tired of paying this ever-increasing tax. So I like the idea of like encouraging through a taxation this incentive to reduce the time stuff is protected by copyrights and patents, and increase the amount of material that's in the public domain, because I agree that we'd all be better off with that.
Oh, can I jump in real quick? Because you did make some great points, and I wanted to follow up on some various stuff that were mentioned. I want to go back to wait. Can y'all hear me? Fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I did want to go back on real quickly on the whole job argument. So here's the thing, and this is just my perspective of it and experience and stuff like that. Job is like if you don't like your job, it actually affects your performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's all about trying to do the task, performing and stuff like that. And if you don't like it, it's going to. I mean, it's almost instinctive. It's going to show in how you function, and it's going to affect your function. And the employers are going to see that, and you'll probably just be let go. And like you want, and they want to talk about guaranteed jobs and stuff. Like, well, they got to be able to do jobs in the first place. They could still get fired. They could still get let go. And what does increasing the wage is going to do for someone who got laid off or is unemployed? Not to mention, just like what Scott said about automation. I mean, they're replacing these jobs with machines. Like even I remember this one Uber who say used to work at Menards, they got an automated forklifter. Um, and you see self checkouts in drugstores during the pandemic. So it's like it's happening, and at the same time, employers are having much higher expectations and making humans try to do the same kind of work, put in the same kind of effort as regular humans, and that's unhealthy. Um, and what UBI does, like I know someone was saying, like, well, if we want them to work a shitty job, we should pay them more on a shitty job. Well, UBI is the paying more. It's like when you do well on a job, you get paid, right? That's what UBI is. Except the only difference is all you got to do is just be an American citizen, a hard worker and stuff, a taxpayer and whatnot. And it's like, and you get this monthly cash relief, no matter what your background is, or your living situation. And here's the other thing. I know the other argument someone made is that if people are given cash relief, well, for starters, the stimulus checks, we didn't get most of those funds. It was $1 trillion package, and we only got 1,000 or so each, 600 at the lowest,
Yeah.
out of $1 trillion package, and nothing else. So you should be asking, when it comes to inflation, you should be asking that question to the big corporations, to our lawmakers and stuff who do these sketchy backdoor deals and have these loopholes where they take all our money and they're just blowing it all on vacations and ridiculous stuff that have nothing to do with help giving us a better future. Um, and also like it also like as far as laziness or whatever, it all depends on your environment. So like if you're living in a very affluent neighborhood, like you got a Whole Foods right down the street, it's clean, it's quiet. Okay, you can use that argument. But if you're living in, like, let's say an impoverished neighborhood, the hood or whatever, where it's like there's gunshots going off, you constantly got to look over your shoulder. It's like you're always like alert, like you can't relax, you can't like or anything like that will definitely have an impact. And mind you, mind of scarcity, that's the big thing. Mind of scarcity. When you've lived with scarcity for so long, and then all of a sudden you get this large sum of money. And I actually did this practice on myself and like one of my friends overseas who's in a toxic environment. You give them a large sum, and they're just frozen. They don't know what to do. Like, hey, I never gotten money in a long time, and then this just showed up. I'm supposed to do with it, and it's like so they didn't have the proper guidance and stuff. Now they might try to use it responsibly, try to invest in stuff, but it's not going to be that well. And like if they were to look in, let's say, renting an apartment or a house or whatever, well, it's not that simple because in the housing situation, they have like these new rules. Like you have to have 3 times the rent. You gotta have a good credit score. You gotta have even rent experience and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not simple as like using that money to find yourself a new place or even stay there. It's like it's a mess out here. So what people will do in those situations is that they will fall back to their old ways. They will binge. They will result to like not to like laying on the couch and stuff, drinking or eating and whatever, because there's not many good alternatives. So there's a lot of effort involved, and I mean it does require for a lot of us to come together on a nationwide scale. And I mean, and I do appreciate hearing these convos. Like the whole time I was listening in, I was having my little lunch. I was enjoying what I was hearing. I just want to take time to get my thoughts together, because this is like we should have more of these conversations. But what it comes down to, as far as like options and alternatives and stuff, it's about like what will be the quickest solution. You got to rent that stew. You got to rent that stew next month or tomorrow, or you're in a place where you could be murdered, or you could be hurt or whatever. Like what is the best solution for those things, for those instances? Because not everybody is in a place that has a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, where they can breathe, where they can enjoy themselves, and whatever, and have options galore and stuff. Not everybody has that option. So UBI provides that for them. Now, getting to that point is a whole different story, and there's a lot that needs to be done. And definitely democracy reform, ranked choice voting, and all that. I mean, although I am skeptic as to how that's going to come to fruition, considering all the corruption we have. But I mean, hey, if it works, I'm on board. But it's like I'm just like doing my own thing, just observing and
By the
trying to
way,
look
just
for. But
sorry
yeah,
to interrupt. Just want to say about the ranked choice voting and all this. Intercoin is starting to work with Forward Party. A lot.
yay.
Yes, we're gonna have another show just about that.
Oh,
Ballot
there's a by
reform.
the way, there's actually a foot party in my state, Illinois, and I'm over in the Chicago area. We definitely need some universal basic income. I mean, the idea was proposed to Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Miss Anti-Poverty, but she denied. She turned it down and said, "Oh, I would rather teach a man how to fish." Did you not hear about automation and like people getting laid off? So it's like, so I mean, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing that there might be a proposal of a sort of child tax credit esque proposal or a guaranteed income, but it's just all talk. It's just all publicity stunt because there's no really proof, not much proof of it, and it's like, and it is upsetting when I see that, when I see these people at the top do that when they're living comfortably in in affluent neighborhoods and stuff while so many people are struggling. So I mean, and we got to do that in order to reduce things like mental health, polarization, uh, being radicalized, and the rest of it. But it's like, but for the big solution, it requires all of us to come together, see which works, improve on that, or spread the word and all that. I mean, I just wish it could be done sooner, but hey, I'm also doing what I can. Got a podcast going, doing stuff on TikTok or whatever. I mean, didn't have much luck, but I'm trying.
Well, you
But
definitely
yeah,
follow us, by the way.
That's what
I
we
mean,
need.
I hope that many of you like follow suit, like and do the same and stuff, and, like especially to uh in your own areas, to those that you care about, that you look after and stuff. Like, if we can't like get all this stuff done, then it's like then at least look after your own, your friends and family and whatever. Like, don't leave anyone behind. Just do what you can.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that was a lot of good stuff, and I think what maybe one thing I want to mention after all that is it reminds me of there was a study that just came out recently that did an experiment of providing one group with $500, one group with $2,000, and then a control group nothing, and they wanted to analyze like the impact on like mostly on mental health and stuff. The conclusion was that the money didn't really have much impact on mental health. It didn't have any impact, and they measured like some negative outcomes, but there was also no real difference between the $500 $2,000. And people will look at a study like that and saying like, see, like basic income doesn't work. And the thing is that basic income is not just about money. The important part really is the unconditionality, the universality, and the regularity, like the ability to depend on this and to be able to plan on it in the future. That is where like these impacts on mental health come from, is this reduction of stress. And that reduction of stress has a lot of other impacts.
UBI is patriotic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a very good thing. So we're going to go to the third part where I want to delve into sort of the actual mechanisms by which to deliver UBI and, compare it and contrast it to the banking system. So I think it's really important here because before we get into that, I kind of want to point out the problems and see, Scott, if you can, talk about maybe how we could address them. Before I do that, just to finish out part two, what about these other? So I'm just going to list them off because you're very good at responding point by point. So federal jobs guarantee we spoke about. Single payer systems like, for example, universal health insurance, right? Only for there's a single payer and they can negotiate better, lower prices than if everyone with a UBI competed for that thing. Can we have some sectors of the economy better served by single payer rather than a UBI? Actually, can you answer that? Can you address that?
No, I fully support the combination of both. I think that I see basic income as a missing foundation that services would be better to exist on top of, because like if you do universal healthcare without basic income, then a lot of those resources are going towards the treatment of poverty, the treatment of inequality, the treatment of chronic stress. there's just it's very wasteful to do all this unnecessary treatment down the line instead of essentially vaccinating people against these impacts with a basic income. It's just far more efficient to do that. So you can see that as being essentially helping pay for each other, where you would save money on universal healthcare by having a basic income, and by having universal healthcare, you could also save a lot of money, a lot of resources throughout the economy by the elimination of unnecessary health insurance administration jobs, which also is one of the reasons why we haven't done it yet. That people worry about what's going to happen to all the people unemployed by like a single payer healthcare system. Again, basic income is great for that, and it's a more efficient economy if you have all these people doing other things than this healthcare administration that's unnecessary. So I think that these things work great together, and should be seen as a combination.
Yeah, but what would you say to people on the left who say that basic income starves the public programs of money? I'll give you an example that is a sort of analog. So you have school choice. You give people vouchers, and they can choose where to send their kids. It has to be a school. It has to be used on a school, but they get to decide. So if a school has really terrible things, parents say, okay, let's go somewhere else. People on the left might say, look, if the school is able to choose which students to accept and which not to accept, then that's going to starve the public school of resources, where right now maybe the public school has some talented kids, some regular kids, and some, let's say, hard to educate kids. Now it's going to be stuck with a lot more proportion of hard cases, right? And essentially, unless everybody has this single payer thing or whatever, the public schools are going to be starved. And I'm just going to say this. What I normally say is, well, just don't let the school decide. Let the people decide. The school has to use a lottery if it goes over capacity. That seems to solve it. But I'm just curious because I think it's the same sort of thing. If you give people choice and they go ahead and they do this and that, what about all of the publicly funded infrastructure? Isn't that going to just end up with all the problem cases nobody wants to do?
Again, I just see basic income as this missing foundation where we do things that are just lead to worse outcomes by not having a basic income. And so, as I said, with healthcare, health is worse by lacking a basic income and just treating healthcare separately. And education is worse because who cares if you provide universal public education if so many of these students going through the system aren't actually getting anything from it, because let's say their homes are insecure, they're very stressful, they can't focus on their work, they go to school hungry. So all these students come out of the system and the outcomes are worse. Their education outcomes are worse, and we see too when basic income is implemented that it has these positive impacts on education. So I think that's what progressives should be focusing on, is that there is this floor where education works worse, healthcare works worse because of poverty and insecurity, and that you need that first. And then those other things should be handled separately. And also part of this discussion too is we don't have that scarcity that, of course we can do healthcare and education alongside, ending poverty with basic income. We can do those things. It's not a choice. And I don't like this people believing that there is a choice. It absolutely is all possible. Especially with those three. There are other things that don't make sense to do on top of it, basic income. But I think that education and healthcare are things that should exist on that foundation.
What about the earned income tax credit? So some people say, look, okay, basic income, I get it. Let's give it to all the poor people. But can we at least have a ceiling or a cutoff at some point? So I'm going to read to you the basic qualifying rules to qualify for EITC. You must have worked and earned income under $57,000, more or less. Have investment income below $10,000 the past tax year. Have a valid social security number. Be a U.S. citizen or resident alien the whole year, and not file a form related to foreign earned income. So they're essentially saying these people who have earned, up to this amount, they're mostly filing taxes like negative income tax, Milton Friedman. Like, why don't we just give it to them and not give it to everyone else who doesn't need it? What would you say to that?
EITC is an example of a program that I think should be replaced by UBI. I think it's entirely unnecessary with basic income right now. It's also a program that provides virtually nothing to childless adults, and it's something that scales by household with children. And so I actually like how Romney's proposal for his essentially child allowance, that's especially his version 1, but also in version 2 looks at replacing the child component of EITC with essentially like a basic income for kids. I like that, and I think that there's other issues with EITC where it actually subsidizes low pay employers so that they're able to keep their wages low, thanks to the subsidy that only is provided to people when they're working. So it's something that basic income doesn't suffer the same issues with, because it's unconditional with work. And so a lot of the value of the EITC, a lot of what we're spending on those are really just basically sending money to employers as well. I think that an analysis of it was I think it's like around a third of the money is essentially just going directly to the employers, enabling them to pay less. So yeah, I don't with basic income, I would eliminate the ATC.
Okay, so now that we get into the third part is about getting the pedal meets the metal. This is actually where I start to kind of be a little bit on skepticism of and genuinely be of the current approaches to UBI. And so I'll explain why. Over the last few decades, there have been people calling for UBI. Martin Luther King called for UBI. Milton Friedman called for a negative income tax, didn't get it. He said about the EITC that the program was based on his NIT, but so different that he himself was against it and he would not have wanted it. Then we had Richard Nixon, then we have Andrew Yang, and many other people in between. Yes, in Alaska, they were able to get it done. Nobody seems to recognize that is a form of UBI. But most UBI has been relegated to two things: either talking about it, which is what, let's say in South Africa, they have the basic income grant. They keep talking about it, and finally saying we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And then there is the...
hey, Greg, I do want to quickly say about South Africa.
Sure.
That idea that they're doing a form of UBI, that's actually bogus. Because my friend that I told you about overseas, she's in South Africa, and she's getting zip.
Well, they didn't implement it. Right. I'm trying to say, as far as I know, I could be wrong.
Only implement for a few, maybe. But yeah, just want to point that out.
In Portugal, they wanted to continue the benefits, the 2020 pandemic benefits, and make it a UBI. Or I think it was in Spain. And look, Portugal's doing great. They have a party there. They call themselves the Socialist Party, and they kind of got into power after the austerity, the sovereign debt crisis, and they really revived the economy. I think they won again recently, third time, on the economy, and a lot of people came back and they're working there. So whatever it is, it's helping the economy. But here's my point: while all of this is going on, people either talk about universal basic income, try to implement it on a federal level, and it somehow fail to do it, or they do these pilots of about 50 people, or maybe if they're really lucky, 500 people. They did one in Mincom, Manitoba, the experiment. They had great outcomes. I think it was one of the best outcomes. But it's nowhere near being universal. And even with all of the mayors for a guaranteed income that have come together, lots of mayors, Michael Tubbs founding that organization, lots of mayors support it. Some of them did basic income pilots, but not a single mayor or city or country or anything, except Alaska, really implemented a universal basic income. Why do you think that is? Is it simply that people don't want that level of taxation, or why is it that it's not been done all this time?
Well, I think there's something to learn from Nixon's family assistance plan, where that passed the House in both 1970 and 1971, and did not make it through the Senate. And there's arguments as to debates as to why it didn't make it through the Senate. But one of the reasons why, aside from the fact that the Democrats were worried that it was insufficiently high, so perfect was the enemy of good in that case, and but Republicans and also Southern Democrats in the form of the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Russell Long, his problem with it was, it is best summarized by his response that, who will iron my shirts? And so then that goes into the question of, what you asked before too, as to, who will be the ones doing all the dirty work kind of thing. And that's this question of it's authoritarian. It's about power. It's about wanting people to do things for you at a very cheap cost. And because we're talking about a power differential, then that's one of the reasons why it didn't happen, was because some people don't want the majority of people, the great masses, to have more power. Um, it, it's a lot to change the power status quo in a way that spreads out power more. That was something that we as a country had to fight a revolutionary war for, and to create like the world's first sea, where we spread out the power, at least among white landowning males. And it's since ended on that, but it's always a battle. It was a battle for women to gain the right to vote. It was a battle for black people to gain the right to vote, to end slavery. That was a power fight. Like civil rights was a battle for all of that. Here we are now. We're still in this battle of making sure that more people have the power through the vote. And I think that Bateson can be seen through that lens too. That whereas like democracy was redistribution of power in a time of kings, that basic income is a redistribution of power in a time of billionaires. It really comes down to changing the status quo power structure, and it's about in order to make that happen, you have to have a government that is willing to respond in a way where we had a government that enacted civil rights. We have to we've lost that. We need to regain that, which is why democracy reforms are so important as well in order to make it happen.
Right, but I think a lot of people who listen to UBI and they've heard a lot of the positives, and I tell them the positives. They are very skeptical about how much money can really be redistributed without causing massive inflation and so on. So let me actually go into what that means specifically. Take, for example, just the $1,600 that was mailed to everybody, and then the Democrats said they'll send a little more or whatever. But the point is that everyone got, every household in the United States pretty much got this, assuming they had a working postal system and they were a citizen and they were, plus or minus. So that money didn't just leave the system. The country printed trillions of dollars, and of course this was only a small part. The other parts were like PPP that would trickle down to the workers, but then was forgiven. And so essentially someone had to issue that money, whether the government or the banking system. And once the PPP is forgiven, that's a liability on their balance sheet in the sense that they owe some other bank or something money. Now, of course, that's a closed system. Banks owe each other money, and they can just as easily cancel bad debt to each other. But the idea is that look at what happened next. People went out and consumed and created a bubble in everything. They bought stocks. They bought cryptos. A lot of assets experienced huge run-ups, whereas in 2020, they were about to crash, and there was the inversion of the yield curve already. So, and now, 2 years later, and all this would happen is malinvestment. It was government stimulus, Keynesian stimulus, that resulted in people spending on all things stocks and things like cryptos and so on. The following year, 2021, there was a supply crunch. There was suppose that people overconsumed things because there's a lot of money velocity. People said, great, let's consume and consume. And of course, there was a pandemic. Of course, there were supply side issues and logistical issues. But also, it seems that everything from lumber to computer chips, there was some sort of supply crunch in everything. Well, and now this year is a bullwhip effect, which is, for everyone listening, basically means that the supply side raised the prices so much that the demand side said, okay, we don't need that much anymore. And then supply side said, wait, we have that inventory, but the demand side already didn't need so much. So supply side dropped prices, but they're out of sync with each other. And so it's sort of like, this is just from the trillions of dollars that's been printed. If we have a real UBI that's not just a few dollars a day, then wouldn't we be risking injecting the economy with all these dollars? Once we get it going and people are used to the steady flow, and that's one thing, maybe people are getting only $5 a day. Like Andrew Yang was running for mayor, and he said people will get $5 a day. That was the math. And the other two candidates on the call kind of ridiculed him for it. Oh, $5 a day is not that much. I can understand a small UBI or a small pilot, but having a UBI that actually accomplishes the things that we're talking about, giving people the peace of mind, wouldn't that completely reshape our economy, where in year one we would have a lot of money being spent into the economy by the people? It would stay in the economy. Second year, there would be some sort of a supply shortage. And the third year, there would be a bullwhip effect and eventually maybe a stagflation. What would you say to people that are very concerned about the huge impact of a substantial UBI that would actually accomplish anything meaningful?
Okay, well, I guess one thing I would suggest to listeners too who really want to get into this is to actually read my book. It's short. It should only take about a little over an hour to get through or something, but it really gets into a lot of this because it's a much bigger discussion. I will also stress too, as I said earlier in this the space, that it's not fair to look at the stimulus checks themselves as somehow like pushing demand like way up beyond what supply was able to do. Like if you look at demand as a whole thing, between like goods and services, an imbalance happened because we were shut down. People didn't have the ability to spend on restaurants and cruise ships and all sorts of other services. So they really only had the ability to spend on goods. And we made sure that stimulus replaced the incomes lost from all of this mass unemployment, and not only mass unemployment, but mass loss of income. And we did a great job, actually, of essentially maintaining the same amount of demand. The demand surpassed the ability for goods to meet it because of the effects of the pandemic and of the global supply chains and everything else. So yeah, it really is a part. Supply is really a big part of the story. And again, if we were to do basic income, I think that we should continue looking at supply as part of the story, where we want to make sure that we can meet supply by investing in actual increasing of capacity. And there are also things that we don't need to worry about that either, especially like, it's not that we don't have enough food for everyone. We just, when instead people, go to the stores who can, and then if they can't, they go to the food bank and they get food there, or, eating out of like dumpsters or whatever. Like, there's enough food, but there aren't enough like permission certificates for people to get that food. And if we make sure that people have those certificates, the cost of food is not going to go up as long as the supply is able to meet that, and we don't have that issue. So what matters is what are the things that will go up in price because there is insufficient supply, and let's make sure that if those are really important, that we invest in those. And if there's something like gold watches or something, then okay, luxury goods can go up in price because more people want to spend money on luxury watches. But that's up to the companies too to invest in greater capacity for. So right. I think that when we are worried about inflation and basic income, it's not. First of all, you have to focus on supply, but also you need to focus on level of taxes, what we're taxing, as well. And so there's no reason why we can't suck sufficient excess demand out of the economy in the form of the money out there through the spending through appropriate taxes. And no one is. I don't think anyone really is saying that we should just print the money for a large basic income and have no changes at all in the tax system. Obviously, there's going to need to be tax changes, and those tax changes should be sufficient and smart in order for the deficit not to be like so large that demand is exceeding supply.
Yeah, but I think there's some disconnect where people say, okay, you're saying all these things where, and we are saying, because I wanted to bring up solutions, but first I want to talk about the problem, is that a meaningful UBI, a UBI that accomplishes the types of things that we've been talking about, better health outcomes and so on. If it's given as a pilot to 50 people, I would argue that's why no one's moved beyond the pilot, because in order to get that amount of money to be redistributed, which you mentioned, the taxes have to go up. So whether they go up after the UBI is introduced or before the UBI is introduced, in the end, we end up with a system with high taxes, and the money is redistributed. And so many people like that, but many other people in the United States are very, very afraid of that because they're going to say also the people are going to vote themselves more UBI. So it starts at $100 a month, but eventually gets to $1,000 a month. And in the end game, essentially what's going on is that there's massive social democracy where there's a progressive tax which is so heavy that essentially pays for all the UBI. And my question is about if we are, what level of UBI in today's dollars would you say that you would like to see if you could have your way? I understand that different people have different ideas. If that level currently would result in what, like a 5x increase in tax revenue, or like how do we actually pay for it, if you will? Yeah, what are the specifics in the numbers? Have you run the numbers for a specific UBI today?
Okay, so first of all, I would again point at Alaska, and I think it's really interesting how they've had their dividends since 1982, and at any point they can vote to increase the dividend. They could vote to utilize more resources besides just oil, to like add into the fund. They could do all kinds of things to increase the size of the fund, the payments, and they haven't been doing that. In fact, the only time recently the governor reduced it single-handedly, and the response was that basically Alaskans fired him, and then the competing replacements were arguing over like making sure that it's part of the Constitution, deciding that what was lost should be paid retroactively to make sure that people get that money back. They just have not made a point of ever increasing their basic income. So, and even like right now, it's an issue to even get people to do more. So it's not like so easy as to be like, oh, everyone's just going to want more and more and more, based on what I've seen of human behavior where like it exists. But as far as like the amount, I don't prescribe a specific amount. I want us to be able to to get it to the point where we've essentially eliminated poverty as we define it, and that we make sure that it continues to increase past that as a share of our overall productivity, which could be measured as something like a share of GDP per capita or something. But it should just continue to grow over time. I'm just interested in starting it. I want it to be universal and unconditional at some level. And so, when the child tax credit, I think, is a great example of a starting point where the challenge that we've seen even is to make sure that some amount of it is unconditional. The enhanced was unconditional, and the Republicans didn't support extending it, even though it reduced child poverty by a third, because they were worried about the impact on parents, as if apparently kids deserve child poverty if their parents are refusing to accept low-paid jobs. But like Romney's Family Security Act version 2 proposes that we essentially do more than the existing child tax credit that doesn't provide anything to those earning $2,500 per year, so that you start receiving something with $1. And I think that there's an ability to make the case potentially with a compromise, saying that look, okay, there's an amount for kids that was, like Romney proposes $350 per month per kid for those 0 to 6, and 6 and up to 18 is $250 per month. And both of those are conditional on employment, essentially, with needing to earn. But why don't we say, well, those 0 to 6, it doesn't make any sense to make that conditional on employment, because you're also saying that whereas those over 6, parents can put their kids, their kids are in school, and then so they're not having to do, the choice between paid childcare or unpaid childcare, thanks to school functioning as childcare. And so therefore, 0 to 6 should actually be an unconditional amount, not contingent on employment, in recognition of parental care at home, and in the interest of family values and nuclear family and whatnot that service should be interested in. That if we set that precedent where 0 to 6 gets to this unconditional amount that's mostly universal, I think that would do a lot to help. And actually, that actually goes back to Nixon too, where the design of his family assistance plan also had this kind of work requirement attached. And so for families, if the the breadwinner uses the father refuses to work, then he would lose his amount, and if the mom could lose her amount, as long as the kids were over 6. But if she would not lose the amount if the kids are under 5, and then of course the kids never lost the amount no matter what their parents did under Nixon's plan. So I think that that kind of thing is a real step forward. And any amount like that, if we could somehow universalize that, if we could say, instead of SNAP, let's do, universal amount of, $300 per month or something for SNAP instead for everybody, or, let's again do a standard tax credit instead of a standard deduction. Like, let's start there and go up.
SNAP idea. I like your SNAP idea. I just got back from Europe recently, and was making a high enough wage where I wasn't really seeing a lot of it. And one thing I noticed, you guys mentioned something about the supply side economics and the demand economics, and the kind of you're saying a kind of basically whiplash effect is we were basically looking at methamphetamine prices throughout in the United States throughout the pandemic and seeing a skyrocketing of the prices. Same thing with other types of drugs. Whereas now, never been lower. So it's kind of interesting that you have this little whiplash effect where the demand for consumer goods seems to be waning and seems to be incongruous with the actual supply. Whereas, with the shadow economy, it seems to be the opposite. At least that's what we think is driving it. We're really never sure, but that's just something that I kind of noticed. Another thing that I noticed is that a lot of people in Europe were spending a lot of their stimulus money on things that they normally would not, and they were spending on things that wouldn't necessarily be taxable. Let's say, we're spending on designer drugs and things like that, stuff like that. They were kind of spending on things that wouldn't really contribute to the. I mean, it would contribute to the economy, but not in the same way that going out and buying a brand new car would. So that's just something that I wanted to mention that I observed from my perspective. It's really interesting to listen to this talk.
And thank you. I actually want to sharpen that question. I think, Scott, people who got the one-time $1,600 wound up buying Bitcoin, buying cryptos, and buying stocks, and creating bubbles in some of those things. I look at some of those things as zero-sum games, meaning for someone to win, someone else has to lose, and typically that's the people who buy at the top. The most amount of capital is invested at the top of the chart, and you could see all of these charts crash down later. So a lot of the people sell at a loss. Here's my question also, I think, and Oxy is saying similar things, is like, if you give people money, some people really need that money and spend it on necessities, for sure. But then there are people who didn't really need that money as much, and with the UBI or whatever, in this case, they would get that every month, not just once.
Yeah, they were giving it away like candy in Europe. It was pretty amazing how much they were handing it out. It was almost like a competition. And I think this, because drugs and underground economy are tied to crypto. You had people buying a crypto to get the drugs, and then vice versa. Then people selling the crypto to fiat to make money for the drugs. So it was kind of like this past 2 years we've been having an inflated crypto system almost. I'm not saying entirely, but I'm saying some of it has been inflated because of our
well, to be fair, probably the drugs were not the biggest driver of the bubble of the crypto.
Okay, yes. To be fair, I'm kind of an old school crypto head. I was selling pot way back in the day in 2012 on Silk Road, and I've kind of held my crypto since then. So I consider myself a kind of fat whale in that sense. But I know that it has other uses now. I've just kind of been basing my in my own professional experience on my chemistry background and stuff. It had kind of maybe tainted my view on the motivation behind crypto. But it is a currency meant to achieve some sort of decentralization. So avoiding taxes, avoiding whatever, laundering money, avoiding the government knowing about your money is sort of the driving force, I think, behind a lot of certain types of cryptos.
Yeah,
Would
I
the
would.
co-host please
I
recognize Izzy at some point because he has been very patient.
Oh,
okay.
absolutely, Izzy, go ahead.
I mean, like, I don't mind waiting because this is a, like I said, it's a good conversation. But I did have just quickly, like, one example of like UBI, a straight up universal unconditional cash relief and stuff. And y'all probably most haven't heard of it because it wasn't broadcast on the news or anywhere else. But over in Quebec, I believe like their French Quebec government, they actually gave their people throughout various provinces 1,500 a month during the pandemic. So they had
Yeah.
to the reason why the reason why they did that is because um, they had to go on I think it was a stage 4 lockdown, so it's like pretty heavy duty,
Yeah.
and they were forced to do remote work, and and it's like, yeah, they had to use, in order to make it work, they had to keep parts of the economy or system open, and then like they had to use like some of the reserves and stuff. But it's like, even though like people would argue like, hey, they should save their money and stuff. But here's the thing though, they were about to have a lot of pissed off workers,
Oh, exactly.
and they had to
Exactly.
solve. So it's like, hey,
Yeah.
are you like, what are your choices? The risk of losing money or dealing with a massive protest on the street, like
Exactly. That's a really good point.
it's like just like with France in general, like the government fears the people. Like if the people are dissatisfied, you're going to have problems. So that's
You're
what
gonna have
matters.
exactly like every
But
5 years. There's always a collapse of the republic there.
yeah,
Exactly.
but it's like if they had, but it's the other reason is that they had, the reason why they did it that way is because they had limited resources,
Yeah.
and we have more than that. So I mean, it should be a bit easier for us. I
Yeah.
mean, then again, like they do have free healthcare. They do have shorter work weeks, work hours, and like, but I mean, if we're able to, if we could easily like print out money
Yeah.
and send them to these rich folks so they can have vacations
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
bail out their friends or whatever, surely we could bail out the people and do this. I mean, it should be much simpler because it's
Yeah,
like,
it really
yeah.
should. And,
So
and I totally agree with you. As like a liberal, I totally agree with you. I was just pointing out some interesting things that I observed. But I think that a basic UBI, I think stuff like increasing SNAP for every household, maybe increasing the actual poverty rate at which you can get rental assistance and SNAP and other benefits and stuff like that. That is a great idea because a lot of times, a lot of families, middle class families, can have 3 or 4 kids, but they still can't afford. They're still above the minimum cap for things like LEAP and like utility assistance and stuff. And I really think it's more like a political thing. I mean, are we going to have an administration or a Congress that has the political will to actually acknowledge that a UBI is the solution? And that's kind of the like question. Is it's not so much whether people like us are going to support it, but it's going to be whether we can convince the politicians to buy
Right.
into it.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing and I want to pose this question to Scott is what Oxy is speaking about. Oxy, sorry, I'll just mute your mic for a second because there's a background noise, I think, coming from it. And Faye, I see
Okay.
you have a question as well. So we can you can speak next. I just wanted to have Scott answer the question. The question is, just with a one-time payment, we saw people rush to buy
Yeah,
these
I
things.
remember. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and answer that. I think it's a good thing for the stock market and for the crypto markets to be decentralized, so that small buyers are able to actually get a share of these companies. It's the stock market is like highly unequal in the amount of ownership of stock, and so like you said, if these are the people buying the stocks who don't necessarily need the stimulus because they didn't have to spend it on food and basic survival needs, and they had the ability to spend it on investing, then that's a good thing. And the bubble was especially in the stock market was largely created, and also the crypto markets, but was largely created by the Fed buying up through QE so much in order to keep up the stock market. And so quantitative easing is effective in keeping the markets from crashing, but it also just obviously creates bubbles. And so, when the Fed is essentially injecting $200 billion a month, into the stock market every month through its purchases, and so therefore into the economy at the top through rich people, then they're going to use it in inflating of housing prices and becoming whales in crypto, and that was a whole lot of money that went straight to the top. And I think that one of the problems with the way that we went about the stimulus during the pandemic was that the Fed just simply doesn't have the ability to do a widely distributed quantitative easing that goes from the bottom up. I argued during that time that I would much rather have the ability for everyone in the U.S. to have a Federal Reserve account, and for the Fed to be able to just put money directly into those Federal Reserve accounts with their quantitative easing instead of what they currently do, and let the markets bottom up instead of top down. That creates such like these huge bubbles. So that's also one of the ways that I would like basic income to be implemented. I think that's an effective way, because not only do you provide the Federal Reserve that ability such downturns to stimulate through direct monetary injection to every single person instead of only the top, that's also a method for solving the problem of the unbanked and getting basic income itself to people by actually providing these free accounts that say everyone can access online or through like the postal service and things like that. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing for people to be able to purchase stocks and crypto. It's just that the bubble was through the Fed, and the Fed needs different capabilities.
Yeah, decentralizing the decisions of what to purchase and other decisions. I definitely support any kind of decentralizing the power to the people, and somehow diluting or maybe even taking away the power of just individual people to direct of our lawmakers even. Forget the insider trading and all this stuff. The lawmakers don't read the bills often, and they are tasked with either saying yes or no, up and down votes on them, which to me seems like I would rather have delegated my vote to some expert, and I think there could be better systems. Before we continue, Faye, you had a question? I wanted to correct
Hi,
you.
thank you very much for holding this conversation. I always join in if I see Scott as a speaker somewhere. And
thanks.
I just think that one of the things that Izzy also brought up is that when you look at all of these things that are happening, you tend to want to just focus in on one little aspect, such as the fact that, people got stimulus checks. But what we never look at is the actual context of all of these things happening. Why did we even need the stimulus checks? That was the COVID. We don't talk about COVID. We don't talk about the fact that bubbles are happening because of, failure of our governments to protect us during this time. And so with that failure of trust in government, that's what, you're seeing bubbles in alternatives to the government money. How can we trust government money, if we don't trust that they can govern and actually behave well? When governments fail, money fails. Those two are together. So you're seeing people hedging against the failure of actual government at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does to be center of the conversation, especially around inflation, the pandemic, and the fact that we could have gone about the pandemic completely differently. That there were some seriously bad choices made. It's not taking it seriously, politicizing it, all kinds of things that led to such a massive effect on our economy that would have been less if you made different decisions. And a lot of people are getting into crypto because of distrust in government, and a lot of this gets into just this just lack of trust that we've got to work on. We've got to fix. We need to make government work better, and we need actual functioning democracy. And I also got to say too that I need to leave here. I got a call at 2:30, so I can only probably do another like one or maybe two questions or something.
Okay.
Before.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, by the way, Scott. Thank you for spending so much time with us. It's been almost 2.5 hours. I would love to invite you to one more of these where we talk about perhaps crypto-based solutions. I don't know if everyone
Yeah,
knows.
we didn't really get to that at all.
Wait. 2 hours. 2 hours. This was going on for 2 hours.
Oh yes. Yes,
Damn, I'm late.
Yeah, we're likely going to have another one, because one thing I want to say, and this is going to be my final question to Scott this time, is that for all the skepticism that I've been throwing in the last half hour, there's a reason for that. I have seen libertarians and other people talk for decades, right? And then it finally took technologists to actually build crypto, to actually build alternatives, PGP, Phil Zimmerman, like all these things had to be built. Patrick Friedman, who is the grandson of Milton Friedman, I'm interviewing hopefully in a month from now, he started to build things like the Seasteading Institute, and now we have the Honduran cities. So I'm very much in favor of people actually building, bottom up, the vision of what they want to do. And cryptos are an alternative form of money. They're alternative to government, but they're also alternative to the banking system. And we have no time right now to get into it, but I just wanted to say one question to Scott, and then we could do this. Hopefully we could talk all about proof of humanity, making sure people have one account. But I'll ask this. If people could only have local currencies, and the UBI was actually given out in every city's local currency, which Intercoin is working towards that, then people wouldn't be able to buy stocks and cryptos. They would only be able to buy things that people historically bought, like food, pay their rent, go to the barber shop, like things that they wouldn't that be more aligned with what they need? A local UBI, wouldn't it be kind of like a local microcosm, and we can try it many times until we got it right, versus one national experiment?
Well, yeah. So first of all, I guess I would again go back to like what Milton Friedman said, where you can say that you'll somehow like stop people from buying Bitcoin or stocks or whatever because it's in a local currency, but obviously people can cash it out and they'll just have less of a value by cashing it out. But they can also trade for these things, and people are very creative in getting what they want using what they have. So it's not like that'll stop, but. Yeah, I fully support local currencies, and I love the concept behind Intercoin, as far as more and more, not just like cities, but communities and groups like coming up with their own currencies that they decide to put their trust in and utilize and use that to circulate for the exchange of goods and services. Like that's great, and I think that these things aren't alternatives. I want to see that operating on top of a basic income, and whether a basic income, at the federal level comes first, or it's some part of it, or whether this is through local implementations of things like Intercoin, and that comes first, then great. But I still want these things working together, and I think that there's like a great future for crypto, and even like the concept of Web3. Going forward for decades and centuries to come.
Scott Santens, always a pleasure to have you here. I love that we can continue this hopefully in the near future. Stay tuned for the second part where we're going to talk about how we could actually program these things into existence. But yeah, I love it. If anyone is interested, please go to intercoin.app. Okay, or go to intercoin.org. You can find out a lot about how we're building the UBI. Forward B, we're going to hopefully build the app for the forward party. And again, I'm coming at this as like, let's build it. Let's help people organize and get their own UBI in their own currency. That's something we'll talk about next time.
Great, thank you, Greg, and thank you for everyone for listening. Check out my website, scottsantens.com. I've also got an FAQ there about UBI, and definitely follow me here on Twitter, and check out my pinned thread as well, which has a ton of evidence if you haven't looked through it yet. Thank you.
Don't forget Scott's book, Let There Be Money, on Amazon.
Let There Be Money, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for letting me speak and having me on, and getting my opinions / questions out. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hope everybody comes to the next one. Subscribe to our channel. And
cheers, Izzy. Cheers, Greg. Thanks, Tara.
Like to be the first to hear about Intercoin's roadmap and news? Definitely join and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to click that little notification button so you can get updates when the next video drops, and the next time we interview a legend like Noam Chomsky or Patrick Friedman. And if you would like to participate in the conversation, go to community.intercoin.app. We'd love to hear from you and about your community. This is what the project is all about. Intercoin, bringing power to the people.